everything that we love, we will lose at some point. And if we think about that from one lens, it can be very depressing. If we think
Yeah.
about that from another lens, it can be very empowering and
Yeah.
it can be very liberating. So we live our lives to the fullest.
Yeah.
But I think what another really interesting point that you just made is that these transitions, whether they be through the different stages of grief, whether they be through life and moving cultures, it's a natural process of disorienting and
Yeah.
orienting ourselves through these turning points of growth.
Welcome to the Life with Grief podcast. I'm your host, grief and soul purpose coach, and fellow griever, Tara Accardo. Angela, welcome to the Life with Grief podcast. This is my second time being able to welcome you to a podcast of mine now. I'm so excited. I had the opportunity to chat with you on my other podcast with my husband, Taste Toast Travel. And that was an amazing conversation. And we focused on some other topics slightly on that one. But the more that you and I were talking, both in that and then outside, offline a little bit, I think we just saw this opportunity to dig into the grief aspect of moving and traveling and uprooting a family or yourself, even if it's just a solo traveler, and what that entails. And there's a lot to unpack there. And I mean, I know people personally in my community, and I see comments and things on social media of people that, whether it was their choice or not, a relocation of some kind has happened. And I think one thing even you and I talked about was, even if it was your choice, that doesn't mean that there's still not complicated feelings about it. And then just now, as we were talking before we jumped on, there's a whole nother aspect of this that I know we want to get into today. So I'm really excited for this. I think this is a really unacknowledged topic, quite
Mm.
frankly, but I think it's one that deserves to be talked about. I think it's one of those, kind of disenfranchised pieces of grief, if you will, that's just, societally kind of not paid attention to, and because it's not a traditional loss, and or it's maybe sometimes met with a lot of like, well, you should just be excited, or just embrace being there, whatever. It's like very
Mm.
maybe glossed over a lot.
Mhm.
I'm really excited for this conversation, and I'm excited to have you join us again.
Thank you so much for having me again. It's a privilege.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I would love for you to start off by just telling this audience just a little bit about yourself, what you do for fun, what you do for work, a little spoiler, and then, yeah, just have everyone get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, thanks. So my name is Angela. I am originally from the New York City area, and in 2010, I left as I had lost my job due to the economic downturn and ended up going to South Korea, spent 4 years there, and ended up moving to the Netherlands. While I was there, I met my husband and decided to settle down and plant some roots.
Mhm.
And with that, yeah, soon after we got married, we found out we were expecting, and we ended up moving to Belgium when I was 5 months pregnant. Yeah, I guess a little bit about me, aside from that, about, what I enjoy doing. I am a lifelong learner. I really love to read. I love, love, love to travel, and I could absolutely do a gastronomy tour of the world. That would
Yeah.
definitely be like one of my lives if I didn't have to work for money.
Yes. Feel that.
But yeah, exactly. But yeah, so that's a little bit about me. And yeah, I'll tell a little bit about my story and then I'll get into why I do what I do and what I do.
Perfect. Sounds great.
So yeah, at 5 months pregnant, we moved to Belgium and
Oh,
it was really, really tough. It was exciting at the same time, but I was in the middle of a really big transition, right?
yeah.
There were changes in my own
A
life,
bit.
there were personal changes, exactly, work changes. I had to close down a successful business.
Mm.
And of course, 5 months after that, my daughter was born. And as I was going through everything that a new mother experiences, the changes in your body, the changes with your dealing with now having to have an infant in your life and all the systems that are starting up there and the grief that no one talks about from, in that postpartum period.
Oh, yeah.
So all of these things and all the struggles for me personally having I choose I chose to live my life and live it
Yeah.
overseas at this point. All of that all together, I really was struggling. And I started to realize I cannot be the only person who's going through this.
Mhm.
And that's when I started to think about starting a business about this. And so I really started to accumulate all the tools and the frameworks and everything to that nature and started the Expat Parenting Collective, which is a business that does modern coaching solutions, empowering, supporting, and connecting in order to help expat parents flourish and to really plant the seeds within themselves, self-awareness and everything that goes with that in order for the next generation to thrive.
That's amazing. That's such a, I was gonna say, worthy cause, and I just, but, we can feel, I think a lot of people here listening, a lot of listeners here, have experienced the loss of a loved one. It's a lot of like death of a person, but I think there's so much identity and sense of safety and things that can come from that. And then what we're really getting into today is this topic of moving. And as we were kind of mentioning a little bit before we came on, it's not like you have to go be moving to a different country, right? Out to experience this type of grief or be an expat or something, right? Like not all of us are moving countries every day, but whether it be, and I know this to be true for many grievers, and actually, I myself was one of them. I was in a home that I liked. Both my parents died, and then it wasn't, I didn't live there anymore. I didn't like, I moved basically back into my parents' condo. That was not a part of my plan. And so I know for a fact there are people listening here, people I've coached, people I've just known through this community that for one reason or another, they either chose to or were, I guess, for lack of a better term, displaced in some way, whether that be because they couldn't afford to live where they were again, or just whatever the circumstances were, they just could not or didn't want to stay where they were. And that is so underestimated in terms of just how we cope with that. And then if you are moving somewhere where, you kind of maybe it feels like you have to start all over again, or, kind of find your people, if you will, which I think is what is so amazing about what you've created is you've created this community. You have that one-on-one guidance if people need it or whatever it is, but you know that sense of identity, that loss of community, whatever it is, can really amplify, whether it was from a more major loss, so to speak, or if it's just the move itself. That loss of identity, all of that that comes with it can cause so much upheaval just on a, mind, body, spirit, our nervous system, everything. It can be so shot, and we don't realize maybe sometimes how bad it is until it kind of like levels out and you find things like, to be like, okay again. And you're just like, oh my God, I can kind of breathe, or I'm okay, I'm getting more comfortable here now. And then if you are dealing with a more major loss on top of it, you're grieving
Ooh,
both. And you're just like, oh my God, where am I? And it can
yes.
really just add to all of that to say, it can really add to like the isolation and loneliness in a lot of ways that we might feel going through a major life change like a move. So I would love to hear from your perspective, and you could talk about any of the moves in particular. This could be more overarching, but just talk to me a little bit about your journey of navigating moving to a new country, a new home, whatever, and balancing that excitement as you mentioned, but also a lot of the things I just mentioned too. Maybe loss of identity, starting a new job, new surroundings, even though it's exciting. And then you're pregnant, in your case, on top of it. Like, oh my gosh,
Mm.
please have enough newness going on. Like, I can't even begin to imagine. So yeah, just like talk us through that a little bit, because I think a lot of people here will be able to empathize with some of the things you say in their own way.
Yeah. So I think if we think about a move as like a major transition or a major arc, if we put it in that way, right?
Yeah, yeah.
With an ending, maybe an in between kind of period and a beginning.
Mhm.
I feel like for me, the best way for me really truly to be able to take on that endeavor was to really kind of come to terms with the wisdom of one's body
Mm,
and the internal and external signs and signals and being able to kind of, dare I say, proverbially close the door in
yeah,
order to kind of cross over that and to begin anew in a new country.
right.
And it's so important because there's so many different changes in these huge transitions. Like I said, it's the loss of relationship, the changes in your home life, the personal changes, the work changes. Maybe for a little one, it could be school changes.
Yeah,
And of course, the inner changes that are happening within each and every one of us. I think one of the changes that were kind of the added on top of that, once you do this a few times, it becomes easier.
sure.
Of course, there are some layers of like how different the culture is and that leap that you may be taking.
Depending where
But I
you're
think
going, yeah.
exactly. And so for me, going to South Korea was actually quite a huge jump.
Oh, I
Um,
see that. Yeah.
Totally different character sets. They don't use the same alphabet as us. And so it was definitely a challenge there, but I took it on in stride. I found it to be quite fun because it was my first major move, and I did know some people there, so things were smoothed over a bit. However, on the flip side of that, there was the move to Belgium from the Netherlands. And even though those two are neighboring countries, there are quite a bit of differences culturally between the two of them.
Yeah.
And I don't think I've realized how, when you have all these different aspects of transitions layered on top of each other, it makes
Mhm.
it that much more difficult. And then when you go through the period of course, having a baby, the hormonal changes, dealing with all the changes of your baby, the changes in your home life, and all of that stuff.
Mhm.
Plus, since I had closed down a business and I was technically unemployed at the time,
Yeah.
it was a lot. And so for me,
Yeah.
that was a really huge transition. And I think due to the changes that happened at that time, I wasn't paying attention to so much the wisdom of my body or the identity shifts or any of the other things that may have helped me in other circumstances. Because, I mean, you know how it is to
Oh,
have a
yeah.
baby and everything that's going on during that time.
It's just off. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
just not q or and then and you're just your priorities are different too, and then you know, my husband and I, we, talk often about moving, going abroad. I know you and I have talked about this and, like, what that would look like, and, you know, we kinda laugh now, it's like, God, it really would be so much easier if it were just he and I, but, like, we have her to think about, and, like, now that she's here, it's, like, almost a little more complicated in some ways than if we were to have gone if I was just pregnant and stuff, you know, it's just picking up all of this, but she's not in school yet and things like that. So I'm like, okay, you know, now's a good time to go potentially, but it's just yeah, it certainly adds a big, very important layer to all of it, and, you know, yeah, and you just want I don't know, at least for me, like, as a mommy, the nesting thing was very real, and I was like, you want, like, a safe, stable home for them, and also just for yourself. You're just like, "I just want some peace in the chaos," you know, and I think especially people listening here can empathize with that feeling of just not feeling settled, you know, and we kinda
Yeah.
never feel like we're gonna be settled again, especially after we go through perhaps a death or a big loss of some kind, or even a divorce or something, you know? Maybe a
Hmm.
divorce is why we're displaced or we have to move or move to at least to a different house, even if it's in the same, you know, town. So, yeah, there's so many nuances to this topic, which, yeah, that's why I'm so glad we're
Absolutely.
talking about it.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things that surprised me, having moved to a country 5 months before my daughter was born, and all the other things that went with it. Once she was here, she was perfect and I was struggling. And I didn't realize it at the time, but it was postpartum grief. And I think
Mhm.
the world talks about how postpartum depression is a thing and it's something we all need to be aware of. But why can't we normalize the phrase postpartum grief?
Yeah,
We
yeah.
are absolutely grieving a part of us that is no longer there or that we miss, or
Mhm.
the fundamental sense of loss of becoming a mother and that change, that bridge, if we happen to put it in that way.
Yep,
And I think if we were to normalize that, grieving our losses, postpartum loss as well, allows us to heal and renew our spirits and be able to take that next step into finding joy and defining who we are and understanding what matriessence or patriessence is.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, can we let's dig into that just a little bit more. And again, I want to be very cognizant of listeners here, and if this piece of the conversation is painful for anyone to hear or whatever, I will make sure I put little chapter markers in this episode so you can like skip ahead. Just in terms of talking about parenthood, I know this can be, you know, a sensitive topic depending on who's listening here, but I'd love to dig
Mm,
into that a little bit as well, just from we don't have to go too far into like all of the cultural differences and so, that's a big topic, but was there anything too from your perspective, like in terms of, raising a baby in a new culture as well, that you meanwhile are still getting used to yourself and, any, because I think, and especially with the Expat Parenting Collective, just parenting in general, country to country looks so different, right? So, can you just talk to me a little bit about that, and, or even if not from your perspective, and or anyone with the people that you work with, and some of like the common struggles or grief or things that, they feel or struggle with?
Yeah, I think the first thing would be is that since we don't have family around, a lot of those things that come up can be a bit more difficult. Some may say
Yeah.
it's a positive because you have a bit more space, but if we
Mm.
don't have that family support there, it can make things a bit more complicated. For
Yeah.
example, and I'm going to generalize here, but most of us in our generation, we want to do things differently than our parents did. So that complication of not having observed specific gender roles that we want to embody can
Mhm.
be incredibly beautiful, but it also can be terrifying because we're truly creating as we go.
Yeah.
The other thing would be is that I think culture can make families beautiful and really life filled with color. And at the same time, if you have partners from different cultures, you have two different ways in which life began, right? So, like,
Yeah.
if we look at the way that two different people were parented, I'm from the US. My
Mhm.
husband's Italian. You have two totally different ways in which people were parented, and that
Oh,
can
yeah.
cause a lot of complication. And on top of that, if you're living in a culture that is of neither of those cultures, you have the society or the cultural or the local national way in which they parent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Through all of that, it's like a kaleidoscope of life, which is so beautiful to see and watch, but at the same time, things can get a bit muddled. My
Yeah.
husband wants to do things one way, I don't agree with that, or vice versa. And then if I'm on mass transport and some woman or man tells me that my kid needs to do X, Y, or Z, you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
So it's complicated, but at the same time,
Yeah.
there's something that's so beautiful about allowing your children to grow up in a culture that's not your own and be able to
Yeah.
know multiple languages. And I want to say in this aspect, there's a type of grief that comes up for our kids, which is the idea that they're identifying with circumstances of their lives and how things may change. That there's grief that can pop up there. For example,
Mhm.
a kid comes to where the same school that my children go to, and then 2 years later they leave. So they have to
Yeah.
get very used to at a very early age in these expat cities
Yeah.
coming and going,
Mm.
And if you're a family that travels a lot, then you also have, the process of having to hold grief from families moving every 2 years from place to place to place to place.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of beauty to this life, but there's also definitely a very challenging aspect to it.
Yeah. A little bit of, for lack of a better term, upheaval, and I
Mm,
don't honestly mean that in a bad way, but I think it's 'cause I think we're a lot alike in that we find it very adventurous, and there's something
hmm
about the exploration part of it. We talked about that, I think, a lot on the other podcasts, and just like, there's so much to embrace there, and a lot of those things you just mentioned, second language, different culture other than our own, like, we want that for our daughter and our family to be, sort of a citizen of the world, so to speak. But again, I think it's like a perfect example of, okay, yeah, you're choosing this. And I think, so many people can be very judgmental about that. They're like, well, you're choosing this. You're upheavaling yourself, like you're kind of like,
Yeah.
this is self-inflicted. Why are you complaining? Why are you grieving? Why are have you experienced that yourself, or maybe people in the collective, like, has there been anything kind of like that, like, dare I say, shame around things like that?
Yeah. I haven't personally experienced that with having a
That's
family,
good.
but I have heard, yeah, when I was by myself and I was moving, I was getting a lot of shame around, like, what are you
Mm,
doing? Come back and live your life, which is a bit much.
yeah.
But as a family, once you have a family and things start to grow and you're expanding, and then people make comments, that's really, I think, a bit more destructive.
Yeah.
And one client specifically of mine told me that her mother made a comment exactly like that, like, "You want support? You left home." And that
Oh,
hurts. That is
that's
really like something that
awful.
strikes the heart.
Yeah.
You're just, whether it be you want someone to listen or whatever, and then they hear
Yeah.
things like that. So, yeah, I think that there's also another side of the coin, which is that you have a lot of expats that take life for granted and complain about
Mhm.
local cultures, and that can be damaging as well, but in a
Yeah.
different way. We can't
Mhm.
see the gratitude, we can't see the other side of things.
Mhm.
But every situation is very nuanced, very different, and very individual. And yeah, sometimes it's very difficult to find the joy or the excitement or the beauty, and other times it's much harder to find the loneliness and the grief because
Yeah.
it depends sometimes on how we see things as well.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you for mentioning that because I think, I want to be cautious with how I say this because I don't want it to, depending on where someone is in their grief specifically. I'm kind of like coming out of the grief part of it here for a moment, but I'm not gonna sit here and say, mindset is everything. And, I want to be very cautious not to say that to this particular audience. But, I think there does get to a point. Again, let's almost remove the grief for a moment where we do have a choice in how we grieve and how we look at things. I mean, I think there's certain emotions and certain things that we might feel that come up that we feel like we can't control. And yeah, I think that's just part of human emotion, right? Like there's sometimes we feel like, oh, this feels so out of control. But I think this has been a big lesson for me at least. I'll just speak for myself and my own sort of grieving experiences. There's a lot more choice in it than we think, right? And I even see some, like, content and things on social media, and I appreciate reels like this where it's like someone kind of films themselves making different choices throughout the day, and I see this a lot with, like, social media, right? It's like, okay, you have the choice to scroll, or you can go outside and go for a walk or garden or something, or, again, you have the choice to doom scroll, or you actually sit and talk to your partner and, not just watch TV and it's like so in thinking about it that way, I'm like, we do have some choices in how we look at these things and any adversity that we might go through, not in like losing a loved one per se, but like in going to a new city, in moving to a new house and whatever. And it's really easy, I think, in grief to get stuck in the why me? Why is this happening to me? Why did my air conditioner go out? Why was this person rude to me on the street today? I didn't provoke them. Nothing came and so I think sometimes can sour certain experiences and things like that. But, I think it definitely is a lot in how you think about it and how you choose to, embrace a new, whether it's a full on new country, culture, whatever, or just a next phase of life that we maybe in some cases didn't ask for. And we didn't want to move, but our hands kind of forced a little bit. And I know this episode's tricky because we might be talking to very different people here, some that are moving by choice and some that maybe moved not so much by choice. So everyone take this, how you will, depending on the situation. But the mindset's a big part of this, I think, and
Yes.
yeah. So, I wanted to also switch gears a little bit and talk about, and this is for the women out there because especially as becoming a mom now myself too, we carry a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of whether we're moving or anything, like, we just carry a lot, but I think in situations like this, especially if kids are involved and again, whether it's a new house down the street or an entirely new country, we are often the glue in a lot of these situations. But I think there's definitely something to be said about, having the right self care, making sure that we don't burn out, trying to kind of, hold everything together. Again, that's a bit of a generalization too. It could also be the other partner. But is there anything that you would elaborate on there or anything that you've experienced yourself as a mom or just other women maybe in the collective that, it's not that the partner's not doing anything or it's not that they're unhelpful, but just, carry a lot of the burden a lot of the time, let's
Yeah.
say.
I think there's two different ways to look at this, or two different lenses to look at it, and that's culturally, but also societally,
Yeah.
or via society.
Mhm.
Um, I learned this through personal experience. My mother-in-law, when my daughter was 3 and my son, I think 3 or 4, and my son was 1 or 2, passed away. And
Mhm.
like most women, she was doing everything for everyone. And she enjoyed doing it, but I don't think she realized how much it took from her.
Yeah.
And yeah, when she had passed away, we all stepped up to kind of fill the void.
Mhm.
And I found myself coincidentally filling that void of what she did, even though I didn't really connect or see myself in what she was doing every day.
Yeah.
So I was the one who was giving and giving and giving and giving and not realizing that it was draining me. I wasn't giving to myself.
Mhm.
So what was so interesting about this is that not only did I not see myself in her and also kind of distanced myself in this way because I was like, why does she do this? But in the
Yeah.
essence, looking back, I realized that we were more the similar than we thought we were.
Mhm.
And long story short, through that whole story, like I ended up like on the verge of burnout because I had given so much during that time. And I had to really like sit back and reflect in order to realize this all. And I stress in my business that women cannot continue to be everything for everyone. We
Yeah.
cannot carry the loads for everyone so they don't struggle. They need to struggle themselves. And this is regardless, everyone needs to live their life.
Yeah.
And this is regardless of if our partners are 100% invested or zero
Mhm.
invested and everywhere on the spectrum because it's us.
Yeah.
Society, culture, many times, often than not, expect the women to do everything
We're
and look
default.
great. Yes,
Yeah.
and
We are
look
the default
great
parent
doing
model.
it.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
No pressure.
And so, exactly. Okay, we can take the boulders off of our shoulders now.
Yeah, my God.
So I really stress to my clients, we need to share the load. We need
Yeah.
to relinquish control. We need to break the chains of these generational patterns, cultural ideals in which we need to be the ones that do it all. And we need to let go. Or the alternative could be burnout, disease, illness.
Yep.
Um,
Long
and it,
term, especially if
yeah.
that is on us long term, and I think I I don't know what I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons women end up kind of being the default in a lot of these situations, and I think our ability to multitask and think of all of the little nuances and everything for ourselves, for the family are like one in my household, that's a big one. Like, it is a strength of mine, but oh my gosh, if listen, you guys, I love my
Mm,
husband dearly, but if he is like, "Oh, well, where's this?" "I don't know. Did you try looking for it?" "Well, no, it's like it was just faster to like ask you because you'll know." And I'm like, and I have to, I've in my marriage, I'm just like, I've had to challenge him a little bit. Use your brain. Think about it for just like a moment before you come to me with this. Like, it's not my responsibility to know all of the like, I didn't sign up for that. What if the tables were turned? How would
mm,
you feel, you know?
mhm.
And so it's, that's day-to-day life, but then add a move, add, things like that on top of it. Oh, that could lead to burnout so fast. I can only
Yeah.
imagine. Yeah, and I've been there.
And
I've
what?
I've I've experienced it too, moving town to town, but, like, in a big move, and if it is country to state or country to country, whatever, and you are getting used to a new community, change of scenery, like, real different thing on top of it, it's like,
Mhm.
that's it's scary. That's a lot.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's really important, whether you're moving from New York to LA or
Mhm.
from Tulsa, Oklahoma to Rome,
Yeah.
it really comes down to having a partner that's willing to realize that
Mhm.
we cannot be two separate entities anymore. We need to interlock, be interdependent on each other.
We're a
This
unit.
is no
Yeah.
longer exactly, and but even more so than I think society really wants to put out there and saying, because
Mhm.
when it's just you two, you really need to make sure that you are communicating, that you're dividing the load, that you are realizing that being vulnerable and communicating your needs, your wants, your desires, your values, your fears, that's where intimacy is. And that's truly where there is more of a balance because you are aware of how you can help each other out.
Yeah.
Without that, it's so hard when it's just the two of you and your
Yeah.
children.
Yeah, and it inevitably falls onto one person. Yeah, I think it's so clear the communication is like way up there. Maybe first, if not foremost, in
Mm.
any kind of move or whatever. Focusing kind of on, let's say, a couple's moving or a family moving here for a moment, because I also want to give a little bit of attention to anyone who's maybe by themselves and moving, because I know there's people in this community that, maybe don't have a partner or kids or something, and I want to give them a little something here too. But focusing on kind of like the family unit, is there anything you would say to anyone maybe going through a transition like this, or it's coming and they're, wanting to go about it in the healthiest way that is best for their family outside of communication? Is there anything that you have seen, experienced yourself, seen in your community that you would recommend to keep in mind to make a transition like this, no matter how kind of quote big it is, as, just beautiful and peaceful as possible? Or are there any stories of where you've seen, things have gone terribly wrong that it's like, okay, could have done that differently?
Well, we try to avoid the terribly wrong
Yeah.
in all scenarios.
Always.
But if there's, gosh, if I were to talk about the terribly wrong, I would say it's when two don't communicate or one
Yeah.
person is not true to what they really truly feel deep down, and therefore
Mhm.
one wants to stay and one wants to go, or that one person is in
Mm,
turmoil with what do I do next? That
right.
can really tear a person or a couple apart.
Yep.
So that would be the worst case scenario, even though it's not
Mhm.
really worst case scenario, you just need to dig deep. And which leads me to
Yeah.
what your first question was. In order to prepare for a move or to really make the best of a move and be open for what comes up and be open for the potential grief of the endings and the beginnings and all that stuff. It's the wisdom of your body. It's understanding that there are going to be identity shifts. It is understanding that you will have to build your life abroad, which takes effort and putting
Yeah.
yourself out there. And the idea that whether it's just one partner, one person, one parent, or two, you're going to be parenting in a different culture, which means that there will be some cultural clashes, but you need to stay true to what's best for you and your
Mhm.
family.
Yeah. Well said. As I mentioned, just for anyone here that's maybe individually moving, or, because I think there's nuances and complexities to both, right? Moving either with a partner or family unit, or as just a solo. And in some ways, people might think that's kind of easier. Maybe in some ways it is, because you have, I guess on paper, less responsibility. But, one could argue that you then don't have the family unit to sort of rely on for emotional support or whatever. And it's like it can be really striking when you get to your new place, and again, if you, let's say, you don't know anyone wherever you're going. So just in your experiences, or anyone, I know, because your collective is more around parenting, but if you have, you know spoken with or coached anyone that kind of did moves individually, is there anything that you would, just say to them or recommend to them in terms of things to keep in mind to make, again, kind of same question, make that transition a little easier?
Yeah, I think the advice is still the same. The questions would still
Mhm.
be the same. The one thing to keep in mind is that you are not only your support for yourself, but you're also your support for your child. So if this person is moving and they have children,
Mhm.
um, there potentially are going to be lots of conversations in which the child's going to need to come to you to feel supported and connected. And that can sometimes be tricky if you're your own, if I put it in like a difficult situation, nervous system, but you're also
Yeah.
extending your nervous system to your child. So really
Mhm.
going in it with grace and compassion and the understanding that it could be a bit more challenging if it's just one person, for sure. And I
Mhm.
would say the same thing with if it was just one person going solo by themselves versus a
Yeah.
couple. It really is important to establish your community. It's really important to make sure that you put yourself out there, but at the same time, remaining true to yourself. That's really, really important.
Yeah. I think that's really important too, in finding genuine connections when you're there too. It's just like, if you kind of aren't, or you're reaching because you just feel like you need people or whatever, and then, you're kind of not putting your most like authentic self out there, or dare I say being a little vulnerable, like, then you attract that too. So I think that's really, for me, that's been definitely important anytime that I've moved, gone abroad, started new schools, went to college, whatever, even though I had friends in some of those places. But there's been many situations where, like when I went to Italy for the 6 months, that I did that in 2017, I went over there not knowing a soul and ended up making friends. And I'm like almost kind of surprised I did that now, back looking back on it. But it helped me, get out of my shell and things like that. But yeah, I think if I'd gone into that any differently than not sort of remaining true to myself a little bit, yeah, would have attracted a different crowd, or that whole experience could have looked very different for me. So, one question I was thinking as you were speaking, in terms of kind of finding a community, finding people who just get you, who get it, who get why you're there and can appreciate that. Because that's big on this podcast. I talk about that a lot, finding a community of people who get it. So be that because of your grief and just being able to hold space for you in that way, or just finding people with other interests and things that you like. Is there any recommendations that you would make to someone who's moving to a new place, perhaps really doesn't have anyone there, or very few people to, I guess, just make friends, right? Find the right people. Is there anything, that you've experienced yourself or in the collective that could be helpful?
Yeah, I always suggest and I always tell people, I ask people, what is your joy? Find your joy when
Mm,
you are going somewhere because this will help with the struggles of the identity shifts. This will
yeah.
help with parenthood and sometimes getting usurped by that and it feeling like it's the only thing that's in your life. So
Mhm.
really, in order to fill your cup, but at the same time find your people, find your joy. Whatever that may be, it
Yeah.
could be a painting class, it could be a dance class, it could be a public speaking club, it could be martial arts, whatever it may be. You'll find your people who love the
Mhm.
same things as you through that, or you'll find other people through that. And it really is a great way for you to kind of tackle two things at the same time.
Yeah.
Because I feel like so many of us, we kind of feel like we're forced to do it at work, or we're forced to by the
Mhm.
children that are the children's friends of our
Like the
child,
parent,
and
friend or something, yeah.
exactly. And that's just so
It's forced.
forced.
It's forced, yeah.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
we don't want that, especially if you're feeling alone. You don't want to feel like you have to blend in with people who you don't
Oh,
gel with.
yeah, yeah.
So really find your joy. If you have something that you're curious about, dive into that. You will find your people, but you need to be true to what makes you happy in order to be able to find those next steps of those people that really are
Y
your
Your
circle, you
people.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my god, thank you. I love that answer. Just finding your joy, going with your joy. That's such a big theme of this podcast, and it really has evolved as I've, healed more in my own journey. It's just like you do realize with time, again, if anyone here listening who's in the more acute grief, like maybe save this for later. I know joy feels very, very far away right now, but I think when dust settles a little bit, or again, if we really are grieving, and not that the grief ever maybe fully subsides, we're going to have our griefy moments still, but when we have a moment of clarity, when we have a moment of peace, and just kind of where we are now, new in your new environment, and you can be like, okay. And it's part of the process of like kind of rediscovering ourselves again, and rediscovering our
Mhm.
sense of self as someone who has perhaps lost someone that they love, or been through a difficult situation and are now in this new place. But also, you are learning about yourself in this new place. And I can definitely say from experience, I'm very much myself in any new place, but like there's other parts of me that come out, and there's a little bit of a different Tara depending on on where I am, all of which are still true to me. I think we can all have, different aspects of our personality that come out in good ways and bad ways, I guess. But it's yeah, I keep coming back to that, and I've learned that a lot in my own experience, like of, yeah, following your joy, following what makes you happy, and getting curious about that and understanding what that means right now. And there's ways to do that. I talk about that on the podcast a lot sometimes, giving more tangible tools of like, because a lot of people might be listening, they're like, I don't know what sparks joy for me anymore. I don't know. Nothing does,
Yeah.
maybe depending on what they've been through. And they're just like, it's not out there for me. I don't know. I don't know. That's okay. Like, it's not a process that has to be rushed. It's something that can and will change over time for each of us. Things that sparked joy for me back in the day or really before I lost my parents, maybe don't spark joy for me now. But
Mhm.
consequently, on the other side of that coin, like, I have found so many more new things that spark joy for me now that were never even on my radar when my parents were here. So it's
Mhm.
just being open. I just think the openness is a big piece of this puzzle whenever we make the choice to move, god forbid we're displaced, or just whatever that journey looks like. Or or maybe the partner gets a new job and you have to move because of that. Or I have a really good friend whose her husband is in the military, so I think we were mentioning that either during
Mhm.
this recording or right before we came on. But military, moving because of that. And so it's like you're doing it for them, for the family and stuff, but like maybe it's not your first choice to move wherever you're having to move to now, but you have to make the best of it. So lots of nuances to all of
Mhm.
this, but have you found that as well? It's like, the communication for sure, big piece of it, but just, yeah, that open-heartedness, open-mindedness being a big, big piece of it all.
Absolutely. And I think one thing that really ties into what you just said was we are constantly changing as humans,
Yeah.
and we will be experiencing many different things throughout our lives.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, everything that we love, we will lose at some point.
Yeah.
And if we think about that from one lens, it can be very depressing. If we think
Yeah.
about that from another lens, it can be very empowering and
Yeah.
it can be very liberating. So we live our lives to the fullest.
Yeah.
But I think what's another really interesting point that you just made is that these transitions, whether they be through the different stages of grief, whether they be through life and moving cultures, it's a natural process of disorienting and
Yeah.
orienting ourselves through these turning points of growth.
Yes. Yes.
If we're open
Yeah.
to when we are feeling a bit more in a okay place,
Mhm.
to exploring the walk through the woods and just deciding to take a different path, or deciding to go with one of our friends to the painting class, even though we've
Mhm.
never painted for, I don't know, since we were 5.
Yeah.
These are ways that can really open the door and allow us to see those small parts of joy in order to be able to open up to all that you just spoke about.
Yeah. I love all of that. It just ties in so beautifully to, what really the essence of this podcast is. It's life with grief, right? It's figuring out what all of that looks like for us now. And there's going to be plenty of things that don't resonate and you're like, "Oh, I tried that. Okay, I don't know." Like, maybe you're like, "Okay, never again," or like, "Okay, maybe like talk to me again in a couple of years. I'll, try it again later."
Mhm.
But always just yeah, just approaching life from that place of, yeah, openness, curiosity, little sense of exploration perhaps, whether it was,
Mhm.
our choice or placed upon us, like just being open to like, okay, what newness can I take away from this? What can I learn here? Not that everything in life has to be a learning experience, but seeing it like you said so beautifully as an opportunity for growth. And you just
Mhm.
never know what doors could open for you career-wise, love-wise, all of it when we allow those little, glimmers to come back into our life.
Absolutely. And as I said on the other podcast recording, this curiosity that you're talking about, it's
Yeah.
truly the bridge to understanding. It's
Yes. Yes. I'm so glad you
really
brought that
this
up.
secret sauce to being able to not only understand ourselves,
Yeah.
but everyone else and
Mhm.
life. And when you just open up that, just a little bit of that curiosity, it just shows the beauty in you and the light and the possibility. And that's where this curiosity, openness, all of this comes from.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Just to wrap this up, if there is someone here listening today, and answer this however you want. I know this is a tricky topic today because, again, we might be talking to individuals, we might be talking to people that have a family, have kids, whatnot. Is there any just final word of wisdom, piece of guidance, piece of advice that you would give to someone who is perhaps in the middle of a transition in a big move like this, or is facing one? And like, what would you say to that person today as sort of a parting word?
Oh, there's so much to say.
Spill it all. I want to hear it, everything.
Yeah, in 5 minutes or less.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the key to a successful move is being open-minded, being vulnerable, being curious, and trying to take small steps,
Mhm.
not big leaps, small steps to find you
I
in
love
this
that.
new place, in this, whether it's a new stage in your life, whether it's a new location,
Yeah.
whatever it may be. Those small steps will make it not feel so big.
Yeah.
And you will still get to where you're going. I'm sure we've all seen those different memes in which you talk about, what growth looks like, right?
Oh, yeah.
The small steps, you'll still get there, and
Mhm.
you will have less shocks than you will if you take these large, huge steps.
Yes.
So,
Great point.
curiosity, openness, and small steps on the path to discovering yourself in this new stage or location.
Mhm. I love that. It feels so much more attainable, so much more, not that it's about, like, attaining anything, you know what I mean? But just if like, attaining peace, attaining a sense of safety again, attaining that community again, just feeling settled, right? So, yeah, I think that just helps take the pressure off a little bit too, and knowing going into it, like, I'm not gonna have all this figured out right away, and that's okay. It's like I say that a lot in just grief in general. It's like a lot of this might not make sense, whatever this is, insert, whatever there. A lot of it might not make sense for a long time. And, just giving ourselves grace for the transition, for all of the change that we have endured, that we will continue to endure. But that doesn't have to be a scary thing. It can be a
Mm,
really expansive, eye-opening thing in a good way if we allow it to be, if we allow that door to just crack open a little bit.
mhm.
And that's where I love that curiosity piece, right? It is doing those little steps each day just to maybe put ourselves out there or be open to our surroundings and whatever they might be now, just to, yeah, just be, I don't know, just embrace that change, which I know can be really hard for grievers. If they're like, I've already been through enough change. Thank you very much. Like I'm done. I don't want this. I didn't sign up for this potentially. Or maybe underestimated how big it was going to feel, right? Or like with your pregnancy, right? It's just like, okay, we're already going through this. And now I have this, like, whoa, this is a little more than I signed up for this, but this is more than I signed up for. You know what I mean? And sometimes
Yeah.
we make these decisions, but we don't realize like how big of a deal it is until we're in the midst of it. And that's okay. I think it's good to give ourselves and others, grace in those situations. We're human. We can underestimate things. Like it happens. But yeah, that's beautiful advice. And I think it's, again, anyone here listening, whether you are moving and relocating or not, those small steps, I talk about those micro moments a lot,
Mm,
are they're so good. They're so meaningful, and that's where I think really realistic, really, like, peaceful change can come in, and it can be a really beautiful process. We allow it
100%.
to be. Yeah. Angela, thank you so much for your time today. I've been looking forward to this conversation because, like I said, we've talked a little bit about this on the podcast before, but never really dug into this. But it's one of my favorite topics. Not so much relocating, but just, I don't know, the idea of just going to a new place and that sense of adventure and everything that comes with it, as overwhelming as it can feel. There's like I go back, it's been on my heart a lot lately, and my husband's. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of comforts of home, but like, oh, we're also being really drawn elsewhere, and oh, how do we balance that? And so it's a lot. So for anyone here listening, if you're going through something similar and just, can kind of empathize with where maybe I am now, with where you are, with where we've been, where we're going, like it's an important conversation to have, like we were saying at the beginning.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much again for your time. And where can people find you, learn more about the Expat Parenting Collective, connect with you, all that good stuff?
Yeah, so our website is www.expatparentingcollective.com. On Instagram, our handle is Expat Parenting Collective. We're also on Facebook under the same name. And if people want to find me personally, they can find me on LinkedIn. And my first name is Angela. My last name is Vitiello, Vitiello. And after that, you will see MBA, MSED. That's how you can find me from the others. And
Differentiate.
yeah, there are quite a few of me in Italy with my name. But yeah, that's pretty much it. And yeah, it would be an absolute pleasure to answer any questions that your community may have on the moves, on the grief that's associated with it, and everything else that comes with it.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your insight, for your wisdom, sharing, your story, the many moves that you have gone through. That was a whole nother topic. So I really hope everyone checks out that episode of the podcast on Taste Toast Travel. I'll link that and where everyone can find you in the show notes as well. But again, thank you so much for your time today. I am sending you a huge thank you for tuning into today's episode, my friend. Visit lossesbecomegains.com for my blog, more coping tools, ways to work with me, and so much more. And be sure you're following along on Instagram and Facebook at Losses Become Gains, and on Instagram and TikTok at Life with Grief Podcast. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and share this episode or this podcast with someone who could use it too. And remember to always keep asking yourself, how will I turn my losses into gains today? I'll catch you in the next episode.